Hello everyone, Loremaster of Sotek here, back with another video, and today we're going to be talking about something very near and dear to my heart, which is that we need more legendary heroes in the game. This is something I have waxed lyrically about quite a bit. It's not a new concept. However, I do think it's important to just kind of keep hitting at that wall every once in a while, just to keep the idea fresh, just to keep the idea present in everyone's minds, and hopefully, pushing for seeing it implemented into the game. So every once in a while, I'm going to come on and just do a video dedicated to a singular character, as there are a pretty large amount of them to look into, but I don't want this to be like a very overwhelming, crazy long video where we talk about every single possible legendary hero or even every single legendary hero for a race, but just focus on an individual character at a time to make the topic as approachable as possible. So if we're going to talk about bringing legendary heroes forth into the game, we have to talk about one in particular as the first, which is the mightiest of them all, Krell, the Lord of Undeath. Insert deep bass blah noise here. Krell is one of the most dangerous warriors to have ever fought in the old world. He was once a mighty champion of Khorne who led the legions of the Blood God against the dwarfs of the World's Edge Mountains, forming an unholy alliance of destruction alongside the night goblins found in the dark caverns to bring low Karak Angor and Karak Varn. Countless men, dwarves, and other creatures fell beneath the black axe of Krell before he finally met his end at the hands of Grimbull Ironhelm during the siege of Karak Kadrin. The Slayer keeps stalwart defense, and the death of Krell caused the hordes of chaos to break at last and flee into the north. The most loyal of Krell's followers, however, took their warlord from the battlefield and buried him far to the south in the Black Mountains. A barrow tomb would be constructed around the Chaos Champion, left to rest eternally in his full armor with his weapon beside him. A great many of Krell's personal guard were laid to rest there as well, some of whom were still living, yet would rather slit their own throats alongside their lord to follow him into the eternal battle that Khorne promised. But Khorne didn't keep his promise. The Blood God had offered endless battle in exchange for Krell's soul, yet in the typical fashion of the Dark Gods, the Lord of Battle had betrayed this pawn when it no longer amused him. Thus were Krell and his warriors abandoned, their souls still bound to Khorne, so left to languish in darkness. For nearly 1,500 years they waited, until one day a powerful sorcerer came skulking up the mountain. Nagash, the great necromancer, had sensed the strength of Krell's soul while looking for the crown of sorcery, and quickly translated the runes upon the cairn, telling the tale of those within. Pleased at this discovery, Nagash tore open the barrow tomb and unleashed his necromancy to claim a new champion. Khorne's wrath was great at this outrage, but the betrayer of Nehekara would not be denied. The duel for Krell's soul raged throughout the night amidst gathering storms and black lightning flashing through the skies, before at long last Krell's corpse began to move. While he had been a loyal champion to Khorne in life, ultimately the Blood God had failed him, and now here was a new, god you could say, offering the same promise, but actually being able to fulfill it. An eternity of battle, not as a slave to the Blood God, but instead as a wight, an undead champion to the great necromancer. For that which is dead cannot die. So Krell rose once more, no longer a champion of Khorne, but instead a champion of Nagash. From here, the great necromancer went even further, resurrecting the entirety of those who had been laid to rest alongside Krell, his faithful servants renewed once more. This skeletal legion would become known as the Doomed Legion, and they marched alongside Nagash and Archon the Black, along with, supposedly, depending on which version of the story you look at, a handful of vampires who went down to fight at the Battle of the River Reich against none other than Sigmar Heldenhammer and his dwarf allies. Here, Krell would face off against none other than High King Kurgan Ironbeard alongside the legendary rune lord Alric the Mad. Despite the efforts of these two legendary heroes, Krell was nigh unstoppable, hacking down any who came against him and proving to be a veritable juggernaut, even taking an early prototype of the organ gun straight to the chest at practically point-blank range. While it damaged his body, it did little to ultimately slow him down. Krell would have broken the dwarven flank had it not been for, at that moment, Nagash was destroyed by none other than Sigmar himself. With the great necromancer defeated, the necromantic energies that suffused much of the undead horde dissipated, leaving few survivors among those loyal to the great necromancer. So, Krell, being enough of a locus of necromantic energy to keep his personal legion still fighting, fought his way free of the battlefield and fled into the night. Those who were with Sigmar were too tired to pursue, and this would prove to be a costly mistake as Krell would go on to rampage throughout the countryside, making his way for the Middle Mountains. Eventually, Sigmar and his allies would give pursuit, and they would follow Krell until they encountered him at Glacier Lake, as it would later be known, a strange ruin that had once belonged to the great empire of Nehekara before its descent into ruination. Here, Krell sought to feed upon the energies found in a sarcophagus belonging to what was likely either a tomb king or a tomb prince. But he would be ambushed by Sigmar and his allies at this point, who, despite their own skill at arms, would barely succeed in defeating Krell and sealing him away within the very sarcophagus he had sought to leech from. Here he would remain, contained by dwarven runes, until in an echo of history, none other than Heinrich Himmler, the self-proclaimed Lichmaster, would discover him. Himmler had been much reduced by this point after a legendary battle where many other necromancers had ganged up upon him, and while he had proved victorious, the duel had left his mind broken. Little better than a beggar who was half mad with whispers of former power tormenting him, seeing Krell's tomb brought something back to the Master Necromancer. And here he formed a bargain with the Dark Gods. While it's not explicitly known what exactly Himmler promised in exchange for their aid, what we do know is that the Dark Gods were satisfied, and they gave Himmler an extreme boost in power, restoring his mind and greatly increasing his magical potency far beyond what it had ever been before. Thus restored, Himmler set about shattering the dwarven runes and resurrecting Krell once again. The Lord of Undeath had returned. Little did Himmler realize, however, it was not purely his will that had caused Krell to come back. Nagash, the great necromancer, although dead, still had his skeletal fingers involved, puppeteering where he could to further his own ends. He greatly desired for Krell to be returned to the land of the living, and thus aided Himmler in this task. Thus, the two would be virtually inseparable, wandering the old world as partners in crime, with most believing, including Himmler himself, that Krell was merely a puppet, a creature controlled only by his will. But for those who were more perceptive, it almost seemed at times like Krell was the true master and Himmler the puppet. In any event, that is the story that kind of explains the background of Krell. He tends to be an inseparable bodyguard from Heinrich Himmler, though you could also say that he's almost there to keep an eye on Himmler and to make sure that the necromancer is doing things that benefit Nagash's will as opposed to fulfilling his own petty concerns. Though who could say for sure? In any event, I think that Krell is definitely one of the characters who most people would agree deserves to be a full legendary hero. A character who appears turn one for Himmler and has his own skill tree, has his own unique magic items, and allows you to have that full, wonderful experience that legendary heroes can provide. I could also see the argument that Krell, if he's made extremely powerful, does not appear until later in your Kimmler campaign, only showing up once you've completed the quest battle for the Chaos Tomb Blade, which Kimmler, of course, loots from Krell's tomb, and that quest battle takes place at the Battle of Glacier Lake, which is where Kimmler resurrects Krell from. But I think it's totally fine to have him come back on turn 1. Now, as to what would Krell really provide differently as a legendary hero from what he currently provides as a summon? Well, the first big thing is that he'd have a skill tree. Krell would have his own abilities, he would be able to level up and significantly increase in power over the course of the campaign, instead of simply being a more stagnant force that is reliant on Kimmler's skill tree, which Kimmler only has, I think, one skill that goes into Krell now in his personal tree. Other than that, everything else is, for his army or for Kimmler personally. Krell, being a full legendary hero, would allow Kimmler to focus on his army and himself, and then Krell to focus on being the biggest combat badass possible. Plus, this would allow Krell to finally be able to properly unleash the Doomed Legion. Originally, the Doomed Legion in the stories we have from back in the day were simply a horde of Graveguard. So they were the personal bodyguard and warriors that served Krell in life and have now come to serve him in death, and are a major component of what makes Krell so terrifying, is that he's not alone. He's surrounded by this horde of terrifying undead warriors who are significantly more skilled and deadly than any other Graveguard. But instead of having them just be a regiment of renown, which, although cool because they have a unique appearance, I think it'd be better to represent them as a skill, in that the Doomed Legion in the end times was actually expanded to be a much more sizable force, because Kimmler and Krell basically went around looking for all of the scattered components of Krell's former army to resurrect all of them. So instead of just being Graveguard, there were also former Marauders who were resurrected as more powerful skeleton warriors, and cavalry. So what were likely former Chaos Knights who were resurrected as Black Knights. Each of these units had significantly improved combat stats, so having Krell being able to join your army, and he's able to have a unique skill tree where one of the skills that he acquires basically allows him to not only grant permanent buffs to all Graveguard, skeleton warriors, and Black Knights in his army, but also, give them improved recruitment ranks and things like that. I could see the argument that maybe he could have a personal banner as well that further is able to buff a singular unit of Graveguard, but honestly, I think just giving him a unique skill tree on top of just kind of the classic combat tree and trees that affect the army that he's with, along with agent actions, I guess, would really allow him to feel like a very powerful character, and would give Kimmler what Kimmler should have, which is extremely powerful Graveguard. I've always found it very weird that I understand that they kind of wanted Manfred von Karstein to be the big bad when it came to elite units, so they allowed him to focus very heavily on Graveguard and Black Knights. But that's always kind of been Kimmler's thing, because he always would run around with Krell, and Krell's thing is the Doomed Legion, which are the most elite Graveguard, period. At least as far as I'm concerned. So I think allowing Krell to focus very significantly on that, as well as becoming as big of a combat badass as possible, helps out quite a bit. Furthermore, Krell would be able to finally get his magic items, which are sorely missed, because right now, Krell's strong, but he doesn't have any of his truly unique abilities granted to him by these magical items. The first is the Armor of the Barrows. The Armor of the Barrows, on top of making Krell exceptionally powerful, basically made him immune to magic weapons. I think the best way to represent that in game would simply to make it where when you get the Armor of the Barrows, It provides you, with significant bonuses, maybe against enemy hero actions. Also, perhaps grants him some bonuses to melee defense or armor, what have you. But as for its really fast, really awesome core ability, it should give Krell immunity to contact effects. That is an ability that we've seen added into the game in recent times, and it is able to provide some significant buffs. But allowing Krell to have that, I think, would just do that extra bit to make him far more terrifying, and I think does a good job of demonstrating the Armor of the Barrow's ability to seemingly nullify the magical abilities of weapons that are striking against him, where poisons or magical flames and all of these other things have no effect. You don't want to go for spell resistance, because magic resistance is its own unique thing within Warhammer. Negating magic weapons, to my understanding, the only real way to represent that would be immunity to contact effects. But do let me know down below if you can think of something you think might fit better. The other one, which is the most exciting, is the Black Axe of Krell. Now, in some ways, the Black Axe of Krell is represented on Krell's character, being that I believe he has that fat anti-large bonus. But the thing that makes the Black Axe of Krell the most famous is that it's this horrifying, almost obsidian axe that whenever it cuts into people, it breaks off very tiny little shards of itself into the wound. And these shards are possessed of a sentience that causes them to dig through the flesh of those they enter and basically make their way for your heart. So it's this agonizing process of these little tiny flints of black metal or glass or stone or whatever it is, slowly eating their way through your muscles and your tendons and your veins until they make their way to your heart, where they puncture through it and you die horribly. It is possible to survive this, but it is very, very difficult. You have to be an extremely tenacious individual, or have a very, very capable surgeon on hand, or, a wizard. For the Black Axe of Krell, I think the most obvious way to have his axe work is, on top of giving you some passive bonuses when you equip it in campaign, such as improved anti-large, significantly more armor piercing damage, etc., it should have I feel like it should have an active component to probably make it a little more on the balance side, but it could be a passive. But whether it's an active ability or a passive trait that he acquires once he equips the axe, it should just do damage over time, because basically that's how it functions. That once you're cut by the blade and it successfully wounds you, it starts eating away at you and you start taking more damage over time. So just making it where, hey, Krell has cut you, you are now functionally, you can kind of think of it as taking bleed damage. Now, it could be made into an active to make it where you have to time when you use it, but I think having it where whenever Krell manages to connect a melee attack with you, you start taking bonus damage for just a small additional period of time would really help make him the absolute terrifying badass that we all want him to be. And then, of course, you have all his blue skills of, if you decide to pull him out of your army and run him around a little bit, he's able to really chop people up with assassinations and assault units and assault garrisons and stuff like that. I do think another thing would be giving Krell the ability to pick up the Guardian ability. Perhaps he could even have a better version of the Guardian ability, because Krell is known for being one of the most skilled and accomplished bodyguards in Warhammer Fantasy. He literally had a rule called Champion of the Dead, which represented that he would pretty much always, it doesn't matter which necromancer he's working for, whether it's Nagash or Heinrich Himmler. When Krell is in business mode, he is all business, and he is there to make sure that his boss stays protected and that he absolutely chops down anyone who gets too close. For that, I would basically just give him Champion, or maybe an improved version that does a ward save instead of physical resistance. Furthermore, if they want to make it like the actual Champion of the Dead rule, Champion of the Dead was better than just typical Bodyguard rules, because while it did provide that, ability to intercept enemy characters making their way for Himmler, it also represented that when Krell was defending his master, so to speak, he became significantly more dangerous, gaining the heroic killing blow rule. Granted, while he has that as an active ability, perhaps he could have a cool a bit version of Guardian where he has Champion of the Dead, so that when he's in Guardian range, he provides a ward save instead of physical resistance, but in addition to that, he also gets a damage buff. So if he's actively protecting a friendly character, not only is he helping them mitigate damage, but he himself is also causing more damage, really incentivizing players for using Krell how he's meant to be used, which is as this absolutely terrifying uber champion of some of the most powerful and terrifying necromancers in all of Warhammer Fantasy. But that is going to end my little rant, my ramble on Krell for today. I will say that I am extremely firm in my opinion that Krell should be a legendary hero. He should not be a legendary lord. He should never be a legendary lord. Krell is not famous for leading armies. The only time he ever leads an army by himself is out of desperation, because the guy that he was basically supposed to be protecting died. And so he hacks his way to freedom and basically runs away. But Krell virtually always is acting as a guard for someone. He is virtually always protecting a very powerful necromancer who is responsible for keeping the army intact, while Krell basically stays around them, almost using them as bait to lure in enemy champions who he then hacks up, or he is sent out by that necromancer to smash through the enemy's most stubborn defenses to make way for the rest of the undead. But I just don't see him as a general. That's really not what he does. Although he's fully capable of leading the Doomed Legion, Krell is never out there really focusing on giving orders to other forms of undead. He is purely focused on being a brute, and doing his best to fulfill his role, whether that's as Nagash's champion or Kemmler's. And I think for the sakes of Total War, he should be kept with Kemmler, being that it's in the timeline that we're in. Should and if Nagash ever gets added to the game, then I could absolutely see the argument for somehow he's able to get access to Krell, perhaps by destroying Kemmler. But at the very least, if you have Krell be like an actual legit legendary hero, that means if you confederate Kemmler's faction, you would immediately get access to Krell and you could do whatever you want with him. You wouldn't have to keep him with Kemmler. Whereas right now he is purely bound to Kemmler as that summon. But do let me know what y'all think down below. If there's anything y'all think should be added in addition to that, or if there's anything in particular you disagreed with. I hope you're all having a lovely Tuesday, and I'll see you guys again soon. Thanks for watching.